Most people spend their entire lives trying to change the outside. They change jobs, they change cities, they change relationships, they change routines, goals, appearances, even identities. And still, if you look closely enough, something inside them never really shifts. The same doubts return, the same fears resurface, the same patterns repeat. Not because life is personally against them, not because they're doomed to fail. It's because the mind they carry into every situation, every conversation, every setback, every new attempt, never truly changes. The mind is everything. And I don't mean it as some flashy motivational line you can slap on a poster and move on from. I mean it as a quiet, uncomfortable truth about how life actually works. What you think, consistently and repeatedly, becomes the lens through which you see the world. That lens shapes every decision you make, every action you take, and every result you experience. You don't react to reality itself. You react to the meaning your mind assigns to it. Two people can face the same obstacle. One grows stronger, the other falls apart. And the difference isn't intelligence. It's not luck. It's not talent. It's the way the mind interprets what's happening in the moment. Most people never question this. They assume their thoughts are facts. They assume the inner voice is telling the truth. They assume emotional reactions are unavoidable, like the outcome is already written, and they're just along for the ride. But what if they aren't? What if your thoughts aren't who you are, but something you've been practicing for years without realizing it? Because that's what thinking really is. A habit, a mental routine repeated so often it starts to feel natural, like it's just you. Like you didn't choose it, and you couldn't stop it even if you wanted to. If you've ever felt stuck, overwhelmed, unmotivated, or disappointed in yourself, hear this clearly. That isn't proof that you're broken. It's proof that your mind has been trained in a certain direction. And if something can be trained, it can be retrained. Now, this audiobook isn't here to hype you up. It isn't promising some dramatic overnight transformation. It isn't telling you to think positive and hope for the best. Instead, it asks you to slow down, to notice how your mind actually works when no one is watching, to catch the patterns shaping your days, quietly, consistently, from the inside out, to recognize how small, repeated thoughts can grow into a whole life. Because your life isn't the result of one big decision. It's the result of thousands of tiny mental choices made every single day. What you dwell on, what you tolerate, what you replay, what you tell yourself when things don't go your way. Over time, those thoughts don't stay thoughts. They harden into beliefs. Beliefs become behaviors. Behaviors become destiny. Whether you realize it or not, over the next hour, you won't be asked to become someone new. You'll be asked to become more conscious, more deliberate, more responsible for the inner world that creates the outer one. And no, this is not about controlling every thought that crosses your mind. That's not the goal, and it isn't even realistic. This is about choosing which thoughts deserve your energy. Because the moment you understand this, something shifts. You stop feeling like life is happening to you. And you start realizing your mind has been shaping it all along. The mind is everything, and what you think, you become. This journey is an invitation to look inward with honesty, patience, and courage. Stay present. Listen closely. Let the ideas meet your own life. What you discover here isn't just theory. It's a mirror, and it's a path forward, step by step, toward clarity, strength, and lasting inner freedom. Today, Chapter 1. Your thoughts are not neutral. Your thoughts are not neutral. Most people believe their thoughts are harmless. They assume thinking is something that just happens in the background, like noise they learn to live with. A passing doubt feels small. A quiet complaint seems insignificant. A familiar excuse feels reasonable. But the truth goes deeper than that. Every thought you allow to stay has direction. It's either pulling you forward or quietly dragging you backward. There's no such thing as a neutral thought. Every thought carries weight. Every thought leaves a trace. When you think, "I can't," something inside you tightens. When you think, "I'll try later," momentum dissolves. When you think, "This always happens to me," your mind starts hunting for proof, evidence to make the thought feel right. And thoughts don't just sit there. They move, they shape perception. They influence action long before you even notice the change. Most people live like their thoughts are private and harmless, like they're locked away somewhere in their head, never affecting anything real. But your mind is the command center of your life. What runs through it determines how you speak, how you move, how you decide, and how you respond when pressure hits. Long before results ever show up in the outer world, they've already formed in the inner one. Think of your mind like a voting system. Every repeated thought casts a vote for the person you're becoming. One vote might not look like much, but thousands of votes over time create a very clear outcome. Confidence isn't a single decision, it's a pattern. It's the repetition of certain thoughts until they start to feel normal, until they start to feel like certainty. The same is true for fear, for hesitation, for discipline, for self-doubt. You don't wake up one day and suddenly realize you've lost your direction. You arrive there gradually, through thoughts you allowed yesterday, last week, last year. You tolerated them because they felt familiar. You believed them because they sounded like you. And eventually, those thoughts build a version of reality that feels fixed, even when it's not. This is where awareness begins. The moment you realize your thoughts aren't neutral, you regain responsibility. And responsibility is not blame. It's power. It means you're no longer a passive observer of what's happening inside you. You become an active participant. You start to notice how one single thought can change the whole tone of your day. So notice what happens when your mind leans negative. Energy drops. Your posture shifts. Effort feels heavier, like everything costs more than it should. Now notice what happens when your thinking becomes deliberate. Not fake optimism. Not forced positivity. Grounded clarity. When your mind changes like that, your body responds differently too. Focus sharpens. Movement gets easier. Action starts to feel simpler. And nothing external might have changed at all. Yet everything feels different. That isn't coincidence, it's cause and effect. Most people wait for motivation to arrive before they act. But here's the truth people don't like because it sounds too honest. Motivation is the result of thinking, not the starting point. When your thoughts weaken you, motivation disappears. When your thoughts support you, action follows naturally. That's why discipline always begins in the mind. So pay attention to the language you use internally. Words like always, never, impossible, too late. They sound small, but they close doors quietly. They reduce options. They narrow your world. Over time, they train you to expect less from yourself. And here's another thing. Your thoughts don't just affect your mood. They teach your nervous system how to respond to life. Repeated stress thoughts create constant tension. Repeated defeatist thoughts create hesitation. Repeated focused thoughts create stability. You're training yourself, whether you mean to or not. Now, this chapter isn't asking you to control every thought. That wouldn't be possible. It's asking you to recognize their direction. Ask yourself, does this thought strengthen me or weaken me? Does it expand my choices or shrink them? Does it move me closer to action or deeper into delay? Once you start asking better questions, your thinking begins to shift. You start to realize your thoughts aren't you. They're habits you've practiced. And habits can change. The moment you stop treating thoughts like facts, they lose their authority. You don't automatically obey every inner command. You pause. You choose. You redirect. That's the foundation of mental strength. Your life will never rise above the level of thinking you tolerate each day. But it can rise immediately when you become aware of it. Every thought matters. Every pattern counts. And from this point forward, awareness becomes your advantage. Because your thoughts are not neutral. They are shaping you right now. Chapter 2. The Invisible Scripts Running Your Life. Most people move through life believing they're making independent choices every day. They decide how to react. They decide what to pursue. They decide when to stop. But beneath all of that, beneath the version of you that feels loud, intentional, and in control, something quieter is always operating. Invisible mental scripts, running in the background, guiding behavior without asking permission, without any conscious awareness. And that's why they're so powerful. They feel natural, automatic, familiar. They don't feel like programming. They feel like personality. Because these scripts are written early, often before you even had the words to question them. You absorb them through family dynamics, school expectations, social rules, and repeated experiences. You learned what earned approval. You learned what triggered criticism. You learned what kept you safe. You learned when to speak and when to stay quiet. And you learned, in ways that were never officially explained, what parts of yourself were considered acceptable, and what parts you had to shrink, hide, or mute to avoid consequences. Over time, those lessons harden into assumptions. You didn't choose them consciously. They became default settings, quietly shaping how much effort you give, how much risk you take, and how deeply you allow yourself to desire. Because these scripts operate beneath awareness, they often disguise themselves as identity. You might say, "This is just how I am." But what you're really describing is repetition. Familiar patterns, reinforced so many times they start to feel permanent. A script might whisper, "Don't stand out." Another might insist you must prove yourself constantly. Another might warn you that failure means rejection. And notice something important. These messages rarely appear as full sentences in your mind. They show up in the body first, as hesitation, as tension, as a subtle tightening, like your nervous system already knows how the scene is supposed to go before your conscious mind catches up. Even painful patterns can feel safer than uncertainty, because the mind prefers familiarity over truth. When something hurts, your brain still learns to predict it. Predictability feels like control, even when it limits you. That's why you can genuinely want change and still resist it. Part of you reaches forward, and part of you clings to an old script designed for survival, not fulfillment. If you look closely at your life, you'll see repetition. Similar conflicts, different faces, familiar emotional reactions, new circumstances, the same invisible ceilings you keep running into, again and again. And those aren't coincidences. They're signals. Signals that a script is still running. Your mind learned these patterns when they once made sense. Maybe they protected you from embarrassment, from disappointment, from rejection. At one time, they served a purpose. But protection can turn into limitation when it goes unquestioned. And that's where awareness begins. The real beginning. Awareness is when you notice the reaction before you justify it. When you create space between impulse and action. In that space, choice becomes possible. This chapter isn't asking you to judge your past. It's not inviting you to criticize yourself for what you learned or how you adapted. It's inviting you to observe your inner responses with curiosity. Notice when your emotions feel bigger than the moment. Notice when resistance shows up without a clear reason, like your body is objecting before your mind can explain why. When a familiar voice says, "Don't try," or "This is risky," pause. Then ask, gently. Where did that voice come from? You don't need to analyze forever. You don't need a perfect explanation or an elaborate timeline. You just need to recognize that it's learned, not absolute truth. The moment you see a script as a script, it loosens its grip. You stop confusing conditioning with identity. You gain the ability to respond instead of react. And from there, you can rewrite the pattern. That's how change actually begins. Not through force, not through motivation that burns out, not through willpower alone. Change begins through awareness, and every time you notice a script running and choose differently, you weaken its hold. You are not here to erase your past. You're here to stop letting it decide your future, because every script can be rewritten, but only by the person who notices it running. As you move forward through this audiobook, carry this understanding gently. There is nothing wrong with you. You adapted. You learned. You survived. Now you're learning how to choose. And that choice starts the moment you become aware of the invisible scripts shaping your life today. These scripts lose power not through resistance, but through understanding. Each time you pause instead of obeying automatically, you remind yourself of something vital. The present is not the past. You're no longer a child reacting from memory. You are an adult capable of choice, capable of direction, capable of growth. With patience and practice, new patterns begin to form. At first, they may feel unfamiliar because freedom often does. But unfamiliarity isn't danger. It's new territory, waiting to be explored. As this awareness deepens, you'll start to notice how often you interrupt yourself before you even begin. How often you assume outcomes before they happen. And those moments aren't failures. They're invitations. They're opportunities to see the script clearly, and then come back to yourself with more honesty. Each time you recognize a script and choose presence over habit, you take back a small piece of yourself. And it's not dramatic, it's subtle, but it's real. Over time, those small moments accumulate. They create a new inner landscape, one where choice becomes normal, and old scripts slowly fade into the background. You're not broken. You're waking up. And that's where everything begins. Chapter 3. Why Positive Thinking is Not Enough. Now let's talk about something almost everyone has been taught. Positive thinking. For a long time, people have been told that positive thoughts are the solution to their problems. Think positive, they say, and everything will begin to improve. Replace negative thoughts with uplifting ones. Repeat affirmations. Visualize success. Smile through difficulty. For a moment, that advice can feel hopeful. Comforting even. It offers relief. It gives the illusion of control. But for many people, it quietly stops working the moment life applies real pressure. Because positive thinking is fragile. It depends on mood. And mood is unstable. You can feel optimistic in the morning and then overwhelmed by the afternoon. You can believe in yourself during calm moments and lose that belief the instant stress shows up. And if that happens to you, it's not proof you're weak or broken. It's evidence that the method has a limitation. Positivity without structure can't survive adversity. The mind doesn't change just because a thought sounds encouraging. The mind changes through repetition, evidence, and discipline. Most people don't suffer because they think negatively. They suffer because their thinking lacks consistency. One moment they feel capable. The next moment they doubt everything. Their inner world swings between hope and fear, motivation and avoidance. And without stability, the mind can't build strength. Here's the key idea. Mental strength isn't the absence of negative thoughts. It's the presence of control. A disciplined mind doesn't ask, "How do I feel right now?" It asks, "What thought will help me act responsibly in this moment?" That question is the line between comfort and growth. Positive thinking tries to eliminate discomfort. Disciplined thinking accepts discomfort and works through it. One seeks emotional relief, the other seeks clarity. And that's why relying only on positivity often leads to exhaustion. You're constantly trying to feel better instead of becoming stronger. When people who depend on positivity face obstacles, they often feel discouraged. They did everything right. They stayed optimistic. They did the mindset thing. And yet reality didn't cooperate. What they lacked wasn't belief. What they lacked was structure. Discipline provides structure for the mind. It's the ability to guide your thinking even when emotions resist. It helps you choose clarity over impulse. Discipline doesn't deny fear. It places fear in proportion. It doesn't silence doubt. It simply prevents doubt from making decisions for you. Strong thinkers understand something most people miss. Thoughts are tools, not commands. When a negative thought appears, they don't panic. They don't suppress it. They don't replace it with forced optimism. They examine it. They decide whether it deserves attention. That creates internal stability. Optimism hopes circumstances will improve. Discipline prepares you to act, regardless of circumstances. Most people wait to feel confident before they take action. But disciplined thinkers understand that confidence is the result of action, not the prerequisite. They move first, even when uncertainty is present. And over time, that trains the mind to trust itself. The mind learns through experience. When you act despite fear, you teach your nervous system that discomfort is survivable. When you hesitate and retreat, you teach it that avoidance is safety. Eventually, the mind adapts to whatever lesson you repeat most often. Positive thinking without action provides no evidence. Disciplined action creates proof. And this chapter isn't asking you to become cold or emotionally detached. It's asking you to stop depending on feeling good in order to move forward. Emotions are signals, they're not instructions. When emotions control behavior, life becomes unpredictable. When discipline guides thinking, life becomes stable. And stability doesn't mean ease. It means reliability. It means you can think clearly, even when things are difficult. So pay attention to how your thinking changes under pressure. Not because you're weak, not because you're failing, but because you may have simply never been taught how to hold your ground internally. That skill can be developed. Start by noticing the moments when you seek comfort instead of clarity. Notice when you avoid a difficult decision by telling yourself everything will be fine. Notice when you distract yourself instead of choosing deliberately. Each moment becomes a training opportunity. Ask yourself, what thought helps me act with integrity right now? Not what feels pleasant, not what sounds inspiring. What moves me forward responsibly? At first, disciplined thinking may feel uncomfortable. Old habits resist change. But discomfort isn't danger. It's evidence that growth is happening. With practice, your mind becomes steadier, less reactive, more focused. You stop chasing motivation and start building momentum. Confidence stops being something you hope for and starts becoming something you generate. Positive thinking can make you feel better temporarily. Disciplined thinking makes you stronger permanently. And once you experience the difference, you'll understand something clearly. Real mental power doesn't come from optimism alone. It comes from training your mind to think clearly, especially when it would be easier not to. Chapter 4. Focus is the real power. Focus has quietly become one of the rarest and most valuable forms of power a person can develop. You live in a modern world that doesn't just offer distractions, it surrounds you with them. Notifications, messages, news, entertainment, opinions, endless streams of information that keep competing for your attention every single day. And none of it is accidental. The environment around you is carefully designed to pull your mind outward, fragment your awareness, and keep you reacting instead of directing your own life. Most people believe their main problem is a lack of motivation or a lack of discipline. But if you look a little deeper, the deeper issue is often something harder to name: lack of focus. Because when attention is scattered, energy becomes scattered too. And when energy is scattered, progress turns slow, inconsistent, fragile. No matter how intelligent, how talented, how determined you are, focus isn't simply concentration. Focus is direction. Whatever you give your attention to doesn't just get noticed, it grows in importance, intensity, and emotional weight. When your focus rests on fear, fear expands. When your focus rests on comparison, dissatisfaction grows. But when your focus rests on progress, on learning, on deliberate effort, confidence slowly forms. And here's the part people underestimate: your outer circumstances may stay the same, but your experience of life can change completely. Because a distracted mind doesn't just think differently, it lives differently. It's always in reaction mode, responding to whatever feels loudest, newest, or most urgent. It jumps from thought to thought, task to task, without depth or continuity. That constant switching doesn't just use time. It drains mental energy until you can't tell the difference between being busy and actually moving forward. You can stay occupied all day and still feel strangely unfulfilled, like you didn't really complete anything that mattered. And that exhaustion isn't caused by hard effort, it's caused by fragmentation. Every unnecessary shift of attention carries a hidden cost. Momentum breaks. Clarity fades. Over time, the mind becomes trained to seek stimulation instead of purpose. Noise replaces meaning. Restlessness shows up even when nothing is truly wrong, because the nervous system never gets a chance to settle. Now contrast that with what happens when your mind is focused. A focused mind feels fundamentally different. Calmer, steadier, less reactive. When your attention stays with one thing at a time, decisions simplify. Inner conflict decreases. Action becomes cleaner, more intentional. Focus reduces the friction inside you. It allows energy to flow instead of scatter. And just to make sure this lands clearly, focus does not mean ignoring reality. It does not mean avoiding responsibility. It means choosing priorities consciously. Because when everything is treated as equally important, nothing truly matters. The mind gets overwhelmed, not because life demands too much, but because boundaries are missing. You can even feel it physically. Notice how your body reacts when your attention is pulled in multiple directions. Muscles tighten. Breathing turns shallow. Thoughts start racing like you're being chased. Now notice what happens when you focus on a single task or a single idea. Your nervous system settles. Breathing deepens. Presence increases. This is how the mind and body are meant to function. When attention isn't scattered, your system stops fighting itself. Most people surrender their attention without realizing it. They let screens decide. Schedules decide. External demands decide what deserves focus. And as a result, they live reactively. They consume information instead of creating meaning. They respond instead of directing. So focus begins with a question. Simple, but not easy. Is this worthy of my attention right now? Is it moving me closer to the life I want to build, or quietly pulling me away from it? Few people pause long enough to ask, and even fewer answer honestly. Focus is a skill, not a personality trait. It strengthens through practice. Each time you resist unnecessary distraction, clarity increases. Each time you stay with a task longer than feels comfortable, endurance grows. Each time you choose depth over stimulation, your mind becomes steadier. A distracted mind seeks novelty. A focused mind seeks meaning. And the real point is this: skill, confidence, self-trust. They're built through sustained attention, not sudden bursts of intensity. Focus allows effort to compound over time. So begin small. Choose one task, one intention, one thought worth holding. Stay with it fully. Notice the urge to escape. That urge isn't danger, it's habit. Let it pass without acting on it. With practice, focus stops feeling like force. It starts feeling like alignment. You feel less pulled apart and more whole. You stop reacting to life and start shaping it deliberately. And that's the real power here. Focus isn't about doing more. It's about doing what matters, with presence. When your attention becomes deliberate, your power returns quietly, steadily, completely. This power doesn't announce itself with excitement. It doesn't arrive with intensity. It shows up as calm consistency. The ability to finish what you start, to remain present when boredom appears, to stay grounded when distraction tries to pull you away. Over time, focused attention reshapes identity. You begin to trust yourself again. You feel capable of sustained effort. You feel clear about what deserves your time. And in that clarity, confidence grows naturally. Not confidence based on hope or mood. Confidence built on evidence. Evidence that you can direct your mind. Evidence that you can direct your energy. Evidence that you can direct your life with intention. That's how quiet discipline becomes real inner strength. And that's how it begins, right where your attention goes. Chapter 5. Your inner voice becomes your identity. Focus on this for a moment. Every day, whether you notice it or not, you're in constant conversation with yourself. It never fully shuts off. It speaks in moments of silence. It shows up during pressure. It appears before decisions, and immediately after you make mistakes. It comments. It judges. It predicts. It encourages when you're doing well. It warns when you're not. And then, if you're not careful, it starts to explain everything. Why things happened. Why you're stuck. Why you shouldn't even try again. Over time, that inner voice becomes so familiar, you stop recognizing it as a voice at all. You stop hearing it as something you have, and start experiencing it as truth, as guidance, as identity. And that matters, because the way you speak to yourself shapes the person you become. Your inner voice isn't background noise, it's instruction. It tells you what is possible, what is dangerous, what is acceptable, what is hopeless. When it's harsh, life feels heavy. When it's chaotic, everything feels unstable. But when it's calm and grounded, life begins to feel manageable, like you can breathe again, like there's a path through. Most people assume their inner voice reflects who they really are. But in reality, it often reflects what they learned. It was shaped by repetition, by your environment, by emotional experiences that left strong imprints. It borrowed tones from parents, teachers, authority figures, and peers. It absorbed reactions from past failures and disappointments, and over time, all those borrowed voices blend together until they become internalized. Then that voice narrates your life. So when you make a mistake, listen carefully. What does it do? Does it correct you calmly? Like, okay, here's what happened, here's what we adjust? Or does it attack you personally? When uncertainty shows up, does it guide you patiently? Or does it intimidate you into hesitation? When effort is required, does it encourage persistence, or does it rush to judgment, like effort is pointless and you should quit? These patterns matter because the voice you hear most often becomes the standard you live by. If your inner voice constantly criticizes, fear grows. If it constantly doubts, delay grows. If it constantly pressures, burnout grows. And none of those create strength. They drain energy. They distort your perception. They quietly weaken your trust in yourself. Over time, your nervous system starts responding to that inner voice like it's an external authority, like it's danger. When the self-talk feels threatening, your body prepares to defend or retreat. When the voice feels steady, your body stays open and responsive. That's why personal change can feel emotionally exhausting. You're not just changing behavior. You're challenging a voice that's been running the system for years. And resistance shows up, not because growth is wrong, but because familiarity is being disrupted. Your inner voice becomes your identity through repetition. What you say to yourself daily becomes what you believe about yourself later. Beliefs shape behavior. Behavior reinforces belief. And over time, that cycle hardens until it starts to feel permanent. But here's the good news. Nothing about this has to be permanent. Your inner voice can be retrained. Not by silencing it, and not by replacing it with empty praise that doesn't feel true. It's retrained by refining it. A strong inner voice isn't overly positive or overly harsh. It's honest, specific, constructive. It corrects behavior without attacking your character. So start by noticing tone rather than content. Pay attention to how the voice speaks, not just what it says. Does it exaggerate? Does it generalize? Does it label you are, instead of describing what happened, this happened? Those habits can be interrupted with awareness. When the voice says, "You always fail," replace the blanket statement with accuracy. This attempt didn't work. It didn't work yet. When the voice says, "You're not ready," replace it with responsibility. I can prepare and try. That isn't fake positivity. That's precision. Precision builds trust over time. And when your inner voice becomes calmer, you create internal safety. When you feel safe inside, you take healthier risks. You recover faster after mistakes. You stay present under pressure instead of collapsing inward. This is how confidence is built, quietly, through repeated moments of fair self-guidance. Your inner voice doesn't need to motivate you aggressively. It needs to guide you reliably. Think of it like a leader, not a critic. Leaders give direction without humiliation. They focus on improvement, not punishment. And as you keep moving through this journey, remember this truth. You become the person you speak to yourself as, so choose that voice with care. Because it will shape your resilience, your effort, your self-respect, and your future more than any external influence ever could. Each time you consciously adjust your inner voice, you weaken old conditioning and strengthen self-leadership. This doesn't happen overnight. The voice you're correcting didn't form in a week. It was built over years. But consistency matters more than intensity. Small corrections, repeated daily, reshape identity over time. When your inner voice becomes fair, steady, and grounded, your actions follow naturally. Effort starts to feel lighter. Decisions feel clearer. You stop fighting yourself and start cooperating with your own mind. And that cooperation becomes a form of quiet strength, carrying you forward even when circumstances are uncertain, even when they're difficult. That inner alignment is the foundation of lasting confidence and emotional stability. Chapter 6. Thoughts create emotions, not events. Most people believe their emotions are caused directly by what happens to them. They say things like, "This situation made me angry," or "That event ruined my mood," or "I feel anxious because of what happened." And honestly, that explanation can feel completely natural, because emotions often show up right after events. But what feels natural isn't always accurate. Here's the real distinction. Events don't create emotions. Thoughts do. Between what happens and how you feel, there's always an interpretation happening first. The mind assigns meaning, then the emotion follows. Two people can experience the exact same situation and feel completely different about it. One feels challenged, the other feels defeated. One feels curious, the other feels threatened. If emotions came straight from events with no middle step, that kind of difference would be impossible. The difference isn't the event itself, it's the meaning each mind attaches to it. Your emotions are responses to meaning, not to reality by itself. And that distinction matters, because it decides where your power lives. If events control your emotions, then you're always dependent on circumstances. Your inner state rises and falls based on factors you can't truly control. But if thoughts create emotions, then emotional stability becomes something you can train from the inside. Most emotional suffering doesn't come from the event. It comes from automatic interpretations. Thoughts appear so quickly you don't even notice them. You don't hear the full sentence "I'm failing," but you feel the heaviness of discouragement. You don't consciously think "I'm not safe," but your body tightens with anxiety. The emotion feels sudden, yet it has a source. Those thoughts are learned patterns. Your mind practiced certain interpretations for years. It learned which situations to label as dangerous, embarrassing, unfair, or hopeless, and over time, those labels became automatic. When that automatic interpretation kicks in, emotion follows instantly. Now, this doesn't mean emotions are wrong. Emotions are signals. They communicate how your mind is interpreting what's happening in the moment. The problem begins when emotions are treated like facts, when you assume the feeling itself is proof of reality. At that point, emotion stops being a signal and starts acting like a command. You begin to obey it. You act as if the feeling is the truth, instead of something your mind is generating. Here's another way to say it. An emotion is a response, not a command. So when you believe emotions come from events, you try to control the outside world to make yourself feel better. You avoid situations. You seek reassurance. You distract yourself. Those strategies can help for a moment, sure, but they never truly address the root cause, because the interpretations remain untouched. When you understand that thoughts create emotions, a new approach becomes possible. Instead of fighting the feeling, you examine the meaning behind it. You ask one simple question, powerful enough to change your entire internal world. What am I telling myself right now? That question creates space. And in that space, emotional intensity often softens, not because the situation magically changes, but because awareness interrupted the automatic loop. You stop getting carried away by the first interpretation, and you regain the ability to choose a more accurate one. This isn't about forcing positive thoughts, it's about questioning the ones you've never challenged. When fear appears, you don't argue with it or suppress it, you investigate it. When anger rises, you don't deny it, you explore the belief fueling it. Over time, this practice builds emotional resilience. You stop fearing your emotions because you understand them. You learn that discomfort doesn't automatically mean danger. It often means attention is required, and your nervous system begins to calm when it realizes you're listening instead of reacting. Emotional regulation becomes less about controlling everything and more about understanding what's happening inside. You stop fighting your inner experience. You start learning from it. That's emotional maturity. You no longer blame the world for how you feel. You take responsibility for how you interpret what's happening. And responsibility here doesn't mean guilt. It means ownership. It means recognizing that your inner world deserves care, clarity, and honesty. As you move forward, keep this in mind. You can't control every event. You can't predict every outcome. But you can learn to notice the thoughts that arise before emotions take over behavior. When you do, emotions become guides instead of obstacles. They point toward insight instead of chaos. You become less reactive, more responsive. You pause before acting. You choose meaning instead of accepting the first story your mind offers. And here's the shift that matters most. This doesn't eliminate emotion. It transforms your relationship with it. You stop being ruled by reactions and start responding with awareness. Practice daily, because this changes how you experience your entire life. You begin to feel steadier even when circumstances are uncertain. You feel grounded even when challenges appear. You trust yourself to navigate emotional waves without drowning in them. And that understanding gives you real freedom. Not freedom from emotion, freedom within emotion. The ability to feel deeply without losing direction. The ability to experience discomfort without collapsing. The freedom to stay present, thoughtful, and grounded in moments that used to control you. When you understand that thoughts create emotions, you reclaim authorship over your inner world. And that authorship quietly reshapes how you live, how you decide, and how you move forward, one moment at a time. Chapter 7. The Hidden Cost of Uncontrolled Thinking. Stress, financial uncertainty, relationship conflict, lack of time, lack of opportunity. These things absolutely matter. But they're rarely the deepest source of exhaustion. Most of the time, the real cost comes from something quieter and far more constant: uncontrolled thinking. Because when your thoughts run without direction, your mind never fully rests. Even when your body is still, your brain keeps working. You replay conversations that already ended. You imagine futures that haven't even arrived. You analyze mistakes long after the lesson is already learned. And at first, it can feel productive, like you're solving problems you haven't figured out yet. But over time, you realize what's really happening. Uncontrolled thinking drains energy without creating clarity. It creates emotional fatigue before physical fatigue even kicks in. And that's one of the cruel parts. Your exhaustion starts inside, quietly, long before you feel tired in any obvious way. Overthinking doesn't solve problems. It multiplies them. Each repeated thought adds tension. Each imagined scenario increases uncertainty. The mind begins to confuse possibility with probability. What might happen starts to feel like what will happen. And anxiety grows, not because danger is actually present, but because imagination is unchecked. Here's another detail that makes this so difficult. Your nervous system struggles to fully distinguish between a real threat and a vividly imagined one. So when your thoughts constantly scan for danger, your body learns to live in low-level alert. Muscles tighten, breathing gets shorter, focus weakens, and eventually that state starts to feel normal. Then there's another hidden cost: indecision. When thinking lacks structure, decisions feel heavy. You see too many options. You imagine too many outcomes. So instead of choosing, you hesitate. Instead of acting, you wait for certainty. But certainty rarely arrives. Life keeps moving forward while you stay stuck in analysis, stuck in the part of your mind that keeps trying to think the problem into a safer outcome. And while you're stuck there, uncontrolled thinking starts to fuel something else too: self-sabotage. You know what needs to be done, yet something inside resists. You delay, you distract yourself, you rationalize avoidance until it sounds reasonable enough to justify staying where you are. And if you've ever felt that internal push-pull, listen closely. This isn't laziness. It's mental overload. When the mind gets crowded with conflicting thoughts, action can start to feel overwhelming, like doing the thing will require more than you have. So the cycle continues, and the cost compounds. Relationships pay the price too. Because when thinking is uncontrolled, you misinterpret words. You assume intentions instead of asking for clarity. You replay tone and expression until meaning becomes distorted. Small issues feel bigger than they are. Misunderstandings don't just happen once, they quietly grow, fed by imagination instead of communication. And as that keeps repeating, confidence erodes. Not the confidence that comes from arrogance, the fragile kind. The confidence that comes from trust in yourself. When the mind constantly questions itself, trust disappears. You doubt your ability to decide. You doubt your ability to act. You doubt your ability to follow through. And every time you hesitate, the mind learns hesitation. Every time you retreat from discomfort, the mind learns avoidance. Over time, that pattern stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like identity. Now, this chapter isn't meant to criticize you. It's meant to reveal the price you may be paying without realizing it. Because an undisciplined mind consumes energy that could have been used for growth. It steals attention that could have been used for presence. It turns simple moments into mental battles you didn't choose to fight. And the cost isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. It shows up as constant tiredness, as lack of clarity, as a feeling of being behind, even when you're trying hard. So what's the solution? It's not to stop thinking. That would be impossible. The solution is to guide thinking. Mental discipline begins with awareness. Start noticing the moments when thoughts circle instead of move forward. Notice when analysis becomes avoidance. Notice when imagination turns against you, when it stops being helpful and starts hijacking your body. Those moments aren't failures, they're signals. So ask yourself simple questions, the kind you can actually answer in real time. Is this thought helping me act responsibly right now? Is it preparing me or paralyzing me? Does it clarify the next step, or does it distract me from it? Uncontrolled thinking thrives on vagueness. Discipline introduces precision. Instead of trying to solve everything at once, focus on the next step. Instead of mapping the entire future, deal with the present task. That alone reduces mental noise. And as discipline grows, something changes inside. The mind starts to feel lighter, not empty, not numb, just organized. You stop carrying unnecessary weight. Energy returns. Focus improves. Decisions feel clearer. And this is the reward of mental discipline. You reclaim space inside your own head. You move through life with less friction. You respond instead of react. Because the hidden cost of uncontrolled thinking is your life force. But when you regain control of your attention, when you guide your mind instead of being dragged by it, you regain yourself. Notes on your web search results. Your provided web results don't directly support or contradict the psychological content of this chapter. They discuss broader cause and effect, embodiment/trauma themes, and unrelated writing excerpts. I did not introduce new claims from those sources into the narration. This rewrite stays faithful to your original chapter's meaning. Chapter 8. Training the Mind Like a Muscle. Like a muscle. Your mind is not fixed. It's not fragile. It's not something you're simply born with and forced to accept. The way your body adapts to what it's repeatedly asked to do, your mind does the same thing. It grows stronger with use, weaker with neglect, distorted when misused. And whether you realize it or not, you're training your mind every single day. Training happens through repetition. Every time you repeat a thought, you reinforce a pathway. Every time you respond the same way, you strengthen a pattern. And over time, those patterns become automatic. They feel natural, sometimes even when they're harmful. That's why mental change can feel difficult at first. You're not fighting truth. You're interrupting a habit that has been running in the background for a long time. Most people train their bodies with intention. They choose workouts. They set routines. But they train their minds by accident. They expose themselves to constant distraction, constant comparison, constant stress. Then they wonder why focus feels impossible. They rehearse worry, doubt, and self-criticism daily. Then they wonder why confidence feels weak. The mind reflects what it practices. And here's the important part. Mental training doesn't begin with motivation. It begins with structure. Just like physical strength is built through consistent, simple movements, mental strength is built through small, repeated acts of attention and choice. You don't need dramatic techniques. You need regular discipline. Think of each day as a training session. What you focus on is the weight you lift. What you repeat is the exercise you perform. If you constantly lift mental weight in the form of fear, the mind becomes skilled at fear. But if you lift weight in the form of clarity, effort, and responsibility, the mind adapts accordingly. This is also why waiting to feel ready doesn't work. Readiness is the result of training, not the condition for it. You train the mind by showing up when it would prefer to avoid. You train it by staying present when distraction pulls. You train it by choosing deliberate thought when automatic thinking shows up and tries to run the show. At first, this feels uncomfortable. But discomfort is not a sign of failure. It's a sign that new muscles are being used. Familiar habits resist change because the mind seeks efficiency, not growth. Old patterns feel easier because they require less energy. Training asks for effort before reward. And that's why consistency matters more than intensity. A few minutes of deliberate practice each day reshape the mind faster than rare bursts of extreme effort. Now there's another piece people forget. Training the mind also requires rest. Just as muscles need recovery, the mind needs silence. Stillness isn't emptiness, it's integration. When you allow moments without stimulation, the mind organizes itself. Clarity emerges naturally when the noise decreases. So this chapter invites you to approach your inner world with patience. You're not trying to dominate your thoughts. You're teaching them. You're showing the mind what matters by where you place attention. And yes, progress may feel slow. That's normal. Mental strength develops quietly. One day you notice you react less. Another day you notice you recover faster. Eventually, you realize you trust yourself more. These changes are subtle, but they're real. Training the mind is not about perfection, it's about reliability. You become someone who can return to clarity even after distraction. Someone who can choose response over reaction. And that reliability becomes inner confidence. When you treat the mind like a muscle, you stop expecting instant results. You respect the process. You commit to practice. And over time, the mind gets stronger, steadier, and more cooperative. That's how lasting change is built. And training also requires intention. Without clear direction, effort scatters. But when you decide what kind of mind you want to build, your practice gains purpose. You stop drifting. You start directing. Each choice becomes part of a larger pattern moving you forward. Of course, there will be days when training feels pointless, days when the mind resists, days when old habits return and try to take over again. But those moments aren't setbacks, they're part of the process. Strength isn't built by avoiding weakness, it's built by meeting it consistently over time. And slowly, your relationship with effort changes. What once felt heavy becomes normal. What once required willpower becomes routine. That's the quiet power of training. The mind you build today becomes the life you live tomorrow. With patience, repetition, and honesty, mental training reshapes identity. You stop seeing discipline as force and start seeing it as care. You learn that guiding your mind is an act of self-respect. And in that respect, strength grows. Strength that supports you long after motivation fades, carrying you forward with calm determination and steady clarity. This foundation lets you build a future that feels chosen, stable, intentional. Chapter 9: Stillness, Silence, and Mental Strength. In a culture that glorifies speed, noise, and constant expression, stillness gets misunderstood. Silence is mistaken for weakness. Slowness is confused with a lack of ambition. But the truth is this: some of the strongest minds in history weren't frantic. They weren't reactive. They weren't running on adrenaline all the time. They were grounded. They knew how to pause. They knew how to be still. And that matters, because stillness is not inactivity. Stillness is control. A mind that can't tolerate silence is a mind that's being ruled by impulses, by distractions, by the constant need to feel occupied so you don't have to feel yourself. As one analysis of the psychology behind silent stucker weakness puts it, silence isn't absence, it's deliberation, and it's the space where thinking can happen before reacting takes over. Gideum, Why Silence is Often Mistaken for Weakness, by Neeraja Pushparaj. When every quiet moment feels uncomfortable, your mind starts reaching for escape. You grab noise to avoid yourself. And over time, that avoidance doesn't just distract you, it weakens your mental strength. Because silence doesn't create problems. It reveals what noise was hiding. When the external world quiets down, your inner world becomes audible. Thoughts rise, emotions surface. Unresolved tensions make themselves known. And many people avoid stillness for a reason that has nothing to do with fear of silence itself. They're not afraid of quiet. They're afraid of what quiet brings up. There's a difference. And here's something else. Avoidance doesn't create peace. It creates dependency. A mind trained to need constant input becomes restless. It reacts quickly, but rarely wisely. It responds before understanding. It speaks before listening. It moves before thinking. And yes, that reactivity can feel like energy, but it's really instability wearing the costume of urgency. Mental strength grows and pauses, not as a shutdown, but as a deliberate ability to stop, breathe, and observe before you react. That pause creates space between stimulus and response. And in that space, choice becomes possible. Without it, behavior turns automatic. Old patterns repeat themselves with almost no resistance because you didn't leave room for awareness to step in. Stillness trains the nervous system to settle. When you allow quiet moments without filling them immediately, without rushing to check the phone, without rushing to fill the air, your body learns something crucial. It learns that you can be present and still be safe. The heart rate slows. Breathing deepens. Attention stabilizes. And that physical settling supports mental clarity. Silence sharpens awareness. When external noise fades, subtle signals start to show up. Earlier and more clearly. You sense tension sooner. You notice thought patterns more cleanly. You recognize emotional shifts before they escalate into something bigger than they need to be. That awareness allows correction before damage is done. Strong minds don't rush to react, they wait to understand. And stillness doesn't mean suppression. You're not pushing thoughts away. You're allowing them to pass without getting carried. You observe without attachment. That kind of observation weakens the grip of impulsive thinking. Because many people believe they have to express every thought immediately. That expression equals honesty. But not every thought deserves a voice right away. Some thoughts need reflection. Some thoughts need refinement. Silence gives your thoughts time to mature. Silence becomes a filter. When you pause before speaking or acting, you prevent unnecessary conflict. You reduce regret. You increase precision. Words become more intentional. Actions become more aligned with who you actually want to be, not who your impulse wants to be for the next 5 minutes. And there's emotional resilience here too. When you can sit with discomfort without reacting, you build confidence in your ability to endure. You learn that feelings rise and fall on their own. You don't need to escape them in order to survive them. That capacity creates inner calm. And calm is not weakness, Calm is readiness. It allows you to see clearly when others panic. It allows you to respond thoughtfully when others get pulled into emotional motion. Calm creates influence without force. It's quiet strength, the kind you don't have to announce. Now, practicing stillness doesn't require isolation or extreme habits. It begins with small moments. A pause before checking your phone, a breath before responding, a second of silence before deciding. These pauses accumulate. And over time, your mind starts to change its rhythm. It becomes less urgent, less reactive, more deliberate. And you begin to trust silence instead of fearing it. That trust changes how you move through life. You stop filling every gap with noise. You stop reacting to every impulse like it's an emergency. You become comfortable with space, and in that space, clarity tends to arrive on its own. That's what stillness is for. Stillness is where mental strength consolidates. It's where lessons integrate. It's where discipline becomes internal instead of forced. The mind no longer needs constant control because it has learned restraint. Silence becomes a source of power. So as you continue this journey, remember this: you don't need to be loud to be strong. You don't need to rush to be effective. Sometimes the most powerful action is restraint. Because when you cultivate stillness, you gain a deeper kind of control, one that doesn't rely on intensity or effort alone. It comes from alignment, and over time, in that alignment, mental strength becomes steady, quiet, unshakable. Chapter 10. Becoming the person you think like. Becoming the person you think like doesn't happen in the moments that feel dramatic. It doesn't happen when hope is high. It doesn't happen when inspiration hits and you feel certain you'll change, starting right now, forever. No, you become that person day after day. Through repetition. Through the thoughts you return to when no one is watching. That's the truth people rarely want to hear. But it's the truth that actually changes everything. Identity isn't built in dramatic turning points. It forms quietly, through what you repeatedly choose to think. Every consistent thought is a direction. And the way you think determines how you interpret effort, failure, time, and possibility. It determines whether challenges feel like threats or invitations. It determines whether discomfort feels like a warning or a sign of growth. Long before the world responds to you, your mind has already decided how you will respond to the world. That's why change often feels slow. You're not just trying to alter habits or behavior. You're reshaping the lens through which you see yourself. And that lens didn't get built yesterday. It's been reinforced for years. Most people try to change outcomes without changing thinking. They want different results while rehearsing the same inner conversations. They hope behavior will override belief. But belief always leads. Behavior follows. The future version of you already exists inside your current mind, at least as a pattern of thought. It's the way you think under pressure. It's how you speak to yourself internally after mistakes. It's the way you respond to uncertainty when you're not trying to look tough or stay comfortable. The gap between who you are and who you want to become isn't time. It isn't talent. It's thinking. Becoming someone new does not require you to erase who you are. It requires you to refine how you think. You don't have to destroy your past. You don't have to pretend you've never been shaped by it. You just have to stop letting past thinking decide present choices. Because every time you choose a more deliberate thought, you practice a new identity. Identity isn't just a label, it's a pattern. When you consistently think with responsibility instead of excuse, you become responsible. When you consistently think with patience instead of panic, you become steady. When you consistently think with clarity instead of avoidance, you become decisive. And that's not just imagination, it's conditioning. The mind learns who you are by watching what you repeatedly think. Over time, those thoughts stop feeling chosen. They start feeling natural. That's how identity stabilizes. Here's the danger, though, and it's subtle. The risk isn't negative thinking alone. The real risk is unconscious thinking. When thoughts run automatically, identity forms without your consent. You don't get to choose. You become whoever your habits create. So this chapter invites you to choose consciously. Ask yourself something specific, something you can actually answer in real life. How does the person I want to become think when difficulty shows up? How do they talk to themselves when progress is slow? How do they interpret setbacks? These questions shift you from outcome to process. You don't need to act like that person immediately. You don't need to fake it from day one. You need to think like them consistently. At first, it'll feel intentional. It'll feel effortful. That's normal. New patterns always feel that way. But over time, effort fades and identity remains. And this is how real transformation happens. You stop waiting for motivation and start relying on structure. You stop hoping for confidence and start building trust with yourself. You stop reacting to life and start shaping it from the inside out. Becoming the person you think like also means letting go of thoughts that no longer serve you. Not every thought deserves your loyalty. Some thoughts belong to earlier versions of you. Keeping them alive keeps you anchored to the past. Growth requires release. As you move forward, keep this simple principle in mind. Consistency matters more than intensity. One clear thought repeated daily outweighs 1,000 moments of inspiration. Identity is built in ordinary moments, through quiet decisions you make without applause. You are always becoming something. The only question is whether you're choosing it. When your thinking becomes deliberate, your life follows. Not perfectly, not effortlessly, but steadily, with direction. And that's the power you've been developing throughout this journey. Awareness, discipline, focus, stillness, responsibility. Together, they shape how you think, and how you think shapes who you become. The mind is everything, and the person you are becoming is already taking form, one thought at a time. Conclusion: what you think, you become. And after this journey, here's what it comes down to. Your life isn't shaped by chance. Not by luck. Not by sudden moments of inspiration that carry you for a while and then disappear. Your life is shaped quietly, steadily, by the way you think every single day. Not the thoughts you wish you had, but the thoughts you repeat. Not the ideas you admire, but the inner conversations you allow to guide you when no one else is listening. Throughout this audiobook, you've explored a simple, but demanding, idea. The mind is everything. Not as a slogan, not as a comforting belief that makes you feel better for a few minutes, but as a responsibility. Your thoughts are not neutral. Your focus is not accidental. Your inner voice is not harmless. Together, they form the foundation of who you become. You've seen how invisible scripts influence your choices. You've seen how positive thinking alone collapses under real pressure. You've seen how focus creates power and how distraction drains it. You've seen how the voice you speak to yourself with becomes the standard you live by. You've seen how emotions follow interpretation, not events. You've seen the hidden cost of uncontrolled thinking, how it extracts energy, clarity, and confidence. You've seen that training the mind requires patience, repetition, and restraint. You've seen how stillness and silence strengthen you in ways noise never can. And finally, you've seen how identity itself is formed by the thoughts you consistently choose. None of this was meant to overwhelm you. It was meant to return something to you. Responsibility. Not blame. Not pressure. Responsibility as power. Responsibility as freedom. Because once you understand that your inner world shapes your outer life, you stop waiting for permission to change. You stop hoping circumstances will save you. Instead, you start working where real change happens. Inside. Now, this doesn't mean you'll never struggle again. It doesn't mean doubt won't show up. It doesn't mean fear will never visit. What it means is this: you'll no longer be confused about where to look when challenges arise. You'll know that before you react, you can pause. Before you believe everything your mind says, you can question. Before you collapse inward, you can choose a steadier response. Growth doesn't require perfection. It requires awareness, practiced consistently. Yes, there will be days when old patterns return, days when distraction feels stronger than focus, days when the inner voice turns harsh again. But those moments aren't failures, they're reminders. Training doesn't stop because you stumble. Training continues because you notice. What matters isn't how often you fall back into old thinking. What matters is how quickly you recognize it and return to clarity. Your mind isn't an enemy you conquer, it's a system you learn to guide. And when you treat it with patience instead of force, discipline instead of denial, it begins to cooperate with you rather than fight you. Over time, your thinking becomes less reactive, more deliberate. Life feels less chaotic, more directed. So remember this, because it's the truth your mind keeps proving as you go. You are always becoming something, even when you feel stuck, even when nothing seems to change. Identity is forming. The only question is whether you're choosing that direction consciously or letting habit choose for you. From this point forward, you don't need to change everything at once. Start small. Choose one thought to question, one moment to pause, one habit of attention to refine. Those small decisions compound quietly, powerfully. The future you want isn't built through grand declarations. It's built through ordinary moments handled with clarity. Your mind is everything, because it's where every decision begins. And now you're no longer unconscious of that fact. You're aware. And awareness changes everything. What you think, consistently and deliberately, you become. Carry that truth with you. Let it guide you. Let your life reflect the strength, the clarity, and the intention you're already capable of creating.